SAFFA Radio bringing home to you. SAFFA Radio bring huis thuis.
All right, it's always great to talk to a fellow born South African here on SAFFA Radio. Andrew Mehrtens, All Black legend, welcome to SAFFA Radio.
Thank you, mate. Nice to be on. I can't believe you haven't invited me previously, but anyway.
Now, before I get to your career, you were born in Durban. I think you were 4 years old before you moved back to New Zealand. Now, I know Kiwis love Durban. I mean, you have Murray Mexted who played for Natal. You had Kevin Putt who played for Natal. You've got John Plumtree. He played there and he coaches there. How did your parents end up in Durban?
Also got Terry Mehrtens, who played for Natal, and in fact he played against the 1970 All Blacks. So my parents went to South Africa. It was a dream of theirs to go and visit the country, see a safari, etc. And then the rugby community kicked in. So my father, who I lost 2 years ago, we lost 2 years ago, had a mate called Peter Hatchwell, also from Christchurch, who was playing rugby in Durban. He got in touch. I don't know at what point they got in touch, but he said, mate, he said, it's fantastic here. Come and play for this wonderful club called Berea Rovers. We'll find you guys jobs. And they did so. Mum and dad are both teachers. They ended up both working at Clifton Preparatory School in Durban and stayed there for 5 years. So from 69 to 74, including that, like I say, dad playing against the 1970 All Blacks. I was born, and about a year later they left to go back to New Zealand. I think partly for family reasons. My mother's father had some illness, worry and problems, and I guess they wanted me to grow up in New Zealand. As we know, things were starting to get a bit fraught in South Africa as well. So they upped sticks and went back to New Zealand. But it always was a very proud thing for me to have this kind of connection with South Africa, especially given the All Black Springbok rivalry over the years, and I really looked into that. I loved the history of that. I remember when I was a little boy growing up in Tuahiwi, North Canterbury, a little rural town, getting my father's Natal jersey out. He also had a New Zealand juniors jersey. He'd played against the 1965 Boks with the New Zealand under-21s. So he's played against the Boks and the All Blacks, and so I'd get out his jerseys, the Natal jersey, the black jersey with the big white band in the middle, and the wildebeest, I think, on the breast, and so it was always a big part of my life growing up with that heritage of being born in South Africa.
But let's get to your career, and I'm going to read in case I get it wrong. From 95 to 2004, 70 tests. You won 5 Super Rugby titles with the Crusaders. Now, I'm going to start off. In your last title, there was a young guy called Dan Carter. When he came and you met him in the first practice, did you think he was special?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to big myself up in terms of talent identification, but it was pretty obvious to everyone how talented he was. I'd made a mistake a couple of years earlier because he also played at my rugby club, High School Old Boys in Christchurch, and I'd gone back and played club rugby, and at one of the trainings during the week, these young guys came up to me and they said, oh, what do you think of Dan Carter, who's going to take your All Black jersey? And I thought, okay, well, good luck to him, good on you. And they pointed him out over on the far field training with the under-21s or something, and I looked at the wrong guy, and I didn't think much of him. So I had in my head, oh, this kid Carter, not that wonderful. And then when I've met him finally at Canterbury and the Crusaders, I've realised that's not the same guy. And then you watch him, he was just unbelievable. And I was lucky, I guess, at the end of my career to be able to play a little bit longer because he was so talented that he wasn't just playing in the 10 jersey. He could play at 12 and 13, played on the wing, fullback, obviously. So he started in all those positions, and we were able to put that talent to use anywhere in the back line. So it enabled me to continue playing 10. If we felt, it was better to have him on at centre or on the wing or whatever, then I could stay playing at 10. So he was a fantastic guy to play alongside. I played a few times with him when he was outside me at 12 and just loved it. Always had a great attitude, always just wanted the ball, wanted to do stuff with it, and obviously could. It was like when he touched the ball, the whole rest of the world was on slow motion for him, he just always had so much time. So it was a big thrill to play with him and with Richie Carter, who was coming through at Richie Carter. It's almost forgotten these guys now. Richie McCaw, who was coming through at the same time, was equally wonderful in a different manner.
So talk about Carter. You also had as competition and opponents Carlos Spencer, Tony Brown. You played against Joel Stransky, Johnny Wilkinson, Butch James, and Henry Honeyball. Who did you hate to play against?
Oh, I didn't really hate playing against anyone. I mean, I was pretty apprehensive. I wasn't a physical guy, as we all know, and some of those blokes, Johnny Wilkinson particularly, pound for pound, would be probably one of the hardest hitters in rugby. He wasn't a big bloke, but geez, he hit hard. He hit probably like a Tongan. Henry Honeyball, as we all know, Lem was like unbelievably tough as well. But I loved playing against those blokes. I always had a good relationship against guys that I was marking. Also had good relationships with guys I played alongside. Carlos over the years, Tony Brown, we're great mates. Simon Culhane, who played that pivotal role in South Africa in '96 when the All Blacks, we managed to win our first ever series in South Africa. And he was also at the World Cup in '95 in South Africa. So, yeah, I enjoyed the rivalry with other fly halves, but I enjoyed the camaraderie as well of playing in the same position as some of these guys. And Stephen Larkham was another one. He was just absolutely wonderful. In saying that, I would have played maybe 10 years against Bernie Larkham, and I don't think I said two words to him, and we didn't avoid one another. But he was just a quiet bloke, and we never seemed to manage to get together off the field. I'd end up having a few beers with George Gregan, for example, Pat Howard, those sorts of blokes. But never really got to know Stephen Larkham. It was only at the 2015 World Cup where we ended up on a Sunday together after the World Cup, having a big sort of long lunch with a bunch of sort of Aussies and Kiwis, that we actually spent a little bit of time with Stephen Larkham. And fantastic. But he was a guy I really thought was wonderful to play against, and an unbelievable player, probably the most complete, apart from the fact he wasn't a goal kicker really, that massive drop goal aside against the South Africans. But he would probably be I would think, most complete fly half that I played against.
Let's go first back to 1999 before we go to 1995. The Wallabies knocked South Africa out. You mentioned Larkham's drop goal. I was sitting behind the post at Twickenham that game. We got knocked out. And then the Sunday, when you guys saw the Springboks get knocked out by the Wallabies, did you think you will play the Wallabies in the final? Were the All Blacks a bit overconfident? I'm going to read to you this. The opening 45 minutes went to script with New Zealand going 24-10 ahead, thanks to a brace of brainstorming scores via Jonah Lomo and the accurate kicking of fly of Andrew Mehrtens.
Well, look, firstly, we certainly weren't complacent going into the game. There'd been the drums beating for the All Blacks ever since we beat England, who was hosting, obviously, or hosting most of the tournament. We beat England at Twickenham in our pool game, and they didn't have a good game, England, and it sort of flattered us a little bit. And after we beat England, the drums really started beating for us in the media, and it was everyone talking about, this is the All Blacks tournament to lose. That wasn't the attitude within the group. In saying that, we weren't really fully aware of what France's capabilities were, so we didn't underestimate them. We just didn't know. They'd come out earlier in the season to New Zealand. We'd maybe scored 50 points against them, I think, one of those games that France has. But even that didn't make us sort of automatically think we were going to win that game. We just didn't really know. And even though we got through that first half and we were leading, I just remember thinking, it's easy to say in hindsight, of course, but I remember thinking that when I look back, going off, Abdel Benazzi just walking off with his head kind of still high at half time. They weren't broken, the French. And then they came out and everything they touched turned to gold, just had those moments. And they had La Maison had an absolute stormer at number 10 for the French. And every time they got into our 22, they scored points, whether it was a try, a little chip kick for Richard Dort or the drop goals to La Maison. They just kept adding the points on. And we just felt completely out of control in that game. And, like I say, it wasn't a lack of respect for the French. You always know they can do that, but we just weren't probably fully aware of their capabilities at the time. So it was obviously pretty gut-wrenching for us, but gut-wrenching for South Africa as well, because, you were world champions at the time, got knocked out by Australia. It led to that awful third and fourth playoff game, which was in Cardiff, I think on the Thursday night. So we had to stay an extra week, play that game. Nobody wants to play that game. Then on top of that, we all had, both teams, both semi-final losers had to turn up to the dinner after the final and watch France and Australia go up and get their medals, etc. And we kind of made pigs of ourselves a little bit there. Nobody wanted to be there, so the South Africans and the New Zealanders, we all just grouped together in one corner and ended up drinking all night and playing silly drinking games. I remember being alongside Mark Andrews, who I'd despised without knowing him. I'd despised him on the field for years, and then suddenly ended up drinking together all night, silly, immature little drinking games, but the Boks and the All Blacks together in this mutual feeling of depression, having been knocked out of the tournament, having to watch the other two teams play the final and go to the dinner.
Let me take you back to 1995. When you guys arrived in South Africa, did you think, because I think the press said it's going to be an All Black Wallaby final. The Wallabies were defending world champions. You guys were, as always, one of the favourites. Did you, in the back of your head, think the way the things are going to go, the Wallabies will beat the Springboks in the opening game, we will probably play them in the final?
No, we didn't think that one bit. In fact, South Africa and New Zealand, we know one another's capabilities over the years. I think we've just got that basis of respect. So while South African media may have been considering the All Blacks, most of the other world media didn't really. We were probably fifth favourites coming into that tournament, largely because All Blacks hadn't been convincing in '94 against the Boks when you came out to New Zealand. We'd lost a series 2-0 to France in '94. The last time the All Blacks had played England in the end of '93, they'd lost. Australia was the current world champions and held the Bledisloe Cup. So all those teams, and the French had a pretty daunting team. So as you guys know from the semi-final, so we were behind really all of those teams in terms of favouritism, and it meant that it was quite good because it meant that through the early stages of the tournament we could go about our work. There wasn't a lot of attention on us. And you go to South Africa as a New Zealander, and yes, you're going to get crowds going to your trainings, as I hope the Boks do in New Zealand as well. And so you're going to get that attention from South Africa. But in terms of the world media, we didn't. And we were able to just go about, like I say, go about our business. We had Wales and Ireland and Japan in the pool games. That was good for us. We managed to sort of survive their onslaught and get through those games relatively unscathed. Obviously, the Japan game was a big blowout. And then we went into the quarterfinal against Scotland, which was another sort of probably little step up. The England performance for us was massive. We had a lot of guys in the All Black team who had been scarred by losing at Twickenham in '93, felt they got treated like second-class citizens after that loss, and which is easy to do from the English. I think we misinterpret them a lot, but anyway, as a New Zealander, we got that chip on shoulder, and so we had guys really motivated. So it was really only when we got through, we didn't expect to get through England, and I think that's reflected in the manner we prepared for that game, and even on a heavy Cape Town track, we were able to play to our strengths and move the ball into space and keep them chasing shadows and not get into a big sort of a trench warfare battle with their big forwards. So we're able to do that, and then suddenly we're in the final, and it was almost like, it was reasonable surprise for us. We look back with satisfaction on the performances that got us there, but it was like, whoa! Suddenly, after this whirlwind 4 or 5 weeks, we're in the final and we're playing the hosts, and it was quite a funny sort of a feeling.
So let's talk about the 24th of June. If I ever have a Groundhog Day, that will be it. It's my favourite day, and I know my wife hates it when I says this. She goes, what about our wedding day? What about the birth of our son? Groundhog Day, 24th of June, to me stands out as my favourite day living in South Africa and as a Springbok supporter. Tell us, did you pick up on the vibe on your way to the game, and how was it walking out there with the crowd there? I know you've mentioned in other interviews the plane going over and shaking hands with the great Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, it was. Look, we didn't realise the depth of what had happened. We didn't at that time know or appreciate how hard Nelson Mandela had worked to unify all South Africans for that particular moment. We knew that in South Africa the Springboks were not reviled, but they weren't fully supported by all the population, particularly the African population, the coloureds. So when the All Blacks toured South Africa, they tended to, when they played or trained in Cape Town, got a huge amount of support from the coloured population. And we experienced that from early in the tournament. We had, huge amounts of South Africans watching us and cheering for the All Blacks and wearing All Black merchandise. And we noticed by the end, really, that had changed. So we had noticed a change. We just weren't fully aware of the depth of it. But, on the bus on the way to the stadium, having South Africans, not boo us, but obviously, cheering for South Africa against our bus on the way there. It was obvious that it was much more universal in South Africa, so we noticed that change. When I got to the ground, Ellis Park, it was my first time playing South Africa there. We'd played against Ireland and Wales, and I loved the stadium and still do, even though I never beat the Box there. But just arriving at the stadium, and it's an adult stadium. In New Zealand, we share our grounds with cricket, and so they've traditionally been very, very broad, and a lot of the time the crowd's a lot further away from the ground than at the specific rugby stadia. So, Ellis Park, where people are right on top of you, you're fully enclosed, was absolutely wonderful for anyone playing in that. People say to me, "Oh, is that nerve-wracking getting out there in front of 60,000 people?" It's not, it's exhilarating, and it's what probably you think every rugby player aspires to. That's what you dream of as a little kid, and being out there in that environment was absolutely wonderful. I tended to stay out on the field a lot more, a lot longer than the other guys. I didn't want to go back in the changing room to get changed too early because firstly, I kind of joked around to try and ease my nerves a little bit, and I didn't want to disrupt other guys' preparation, so I didn't want to be around them being a bit flippant. But also, I just loved being out there and soaking up the atmosphere and the environment. And so that meant that while the other guys had gone back in the changing room to get changed after looking at the field, I was still out there when the plane came over, and it was just unbelievable. I don't think you'd get. I know they did it in Cape Town last year as well, but I don't think you'd get it that low in this day and age. So it was just incredible to see it go over. I remember seeing Go Boca underneath, and that was just phenomenal. And getting out, it was awesome to get out on the field. I had a little bit of a conflict because we'd won the toss. And so it was our kickoff, and we were going to kick the wrong way from the traditional way to the left for a right-footed kick. I was kicking to the right. I was nervous about that and I think in the end, maybe the kickoff didn't go 10 metres, but I was nervous about getting the kick 10 metres. So I had this really mundane thought in my head. I've got to, in 2 minutes' time after doing the haka, I've got to kick off and make sure it gets 10 metres. But at the same time, I'm just about to shake hands with one of the iconic figures of humanity. What a great moment. I'm going to remember this till I die. But at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, shortly that kickoff's got to go 10 metres, So it was a big thrill to meet Nelson Mandela. I noticed that he stopped for quite a while at Jonah. I wondered if he was going to maybe bring out his autograph book or if Jonah was going to bring out his. So, but that was a big moment.
Ruben Krier scored a try. No ways about it. That was a try.
I can't even remember, and I didn't think so. I don't think our guys thought we got away with one, and it was mostly the forwards all hands on deck, I think, as well. I mean, I wouldn't have begrudged a guy like Ruben Krier a try in a World Cup final. He was a guy who everybody in rugby respected. I mean, he was diametrically opposite to me. He was a tough bloke, uncompromising, got in and rolled his sleeves up and did the work. But I got on really, really well with him, really liked him. He did a very magnanimous thing for me a few years later in that 99 Super Rugby game where I gave a bit of a gesture to the Pretoria, to the Loftus crowd. And in the press conference afterwards, where I'd asked the coach if I could go along to the press conference, I said to Wayne Smith, "Can I come and apologise for my actions?" In that press conference, they got onto it straight away, and then they asked Ruben. They said they asked Ben, and what did you think about what Mehrtens did? And he had a little bit of a think, and he looked over and almost had a little grin at me, and he said, "I probably would have done the same thing." And
Look, in his heart,
which was a great way to diffuse it.
Yeah,
but
he was a
no, I don't think
in his heart.
I don't think it was a try, but both teams, when in a game that tight, will both look back on missed opportunities either through us or some contentious refereeing calls or whatever. Most New Zealanders look back on a pass that went out to Jonah where he finally got space. He hadn't been given space all day. The Boks were just all over him. Yapi Mulder and James Small up in his face, of course, but there was one pass there or something, but it came down to just South Africa not allowing us the space to run around them and run them off the park like we had done to the other teams, and they just knocked us over all day, plus put more pressure on us with the ball in hand than other teams had done as well. So all I can do is look back on that with admiration for the Boks.
And Zinzanbroek has just gone back to South Africa for the 30-year reunion How did you end up there, you and Zinni?
Well, I think it's fair to say that I did my fair bit for Springbok rugby on the day. We look at Joel. I mean, Joel, that beautiful drop goal that he hit from the wrong side. He dropped back in the pocket. We weren't probably anticipating that he would go for the drop goal straight away. Hit it unbelievably, flew so beautifully. And so people talk about Stransky's drop goals. What they don't talk about as much, in my opinion, is the 4 or 5 drop goals that I missed. So I did reckon 4 or 5 times more than Joel for the South African victory. So come back down and to, spend time in the South African rugby union, rugby community was a massive thrill to see guys I hadn't seen in a long time. I ran into Yapi Mulder last year and Johan Roo. I've seen Corbus or spoken to Corbus Visa reasonably often on his show. But to see some of the other guys as well, Adrian Richter, Mark Andrews, I hadn't seen probably since that night in Wales. And so to see those guys and, while it's hurtful as a loss, you'll never get over a loss and you can never get it back. But to have something in common with those guys, we've got a shared history there, and it was just nice to be down there. And obviously there are 5 guys from the box side who are no longer with us, and we've lost Jonah as well. So it's time to think back on those guys. And we mentioned Ruben Kruger before, who was the first one from that final for us to lose, I think 2010. So there were little moments like that, but we've got that shared history, and it was a pleasure to be down there, even though it's reliving some painful memories for us.
Now, you've mentioned the flipping the Bulls, the bird, and I don't mind. I'm a Stormer supporter. Sledging, George Gregan's 4 more years, boys, is probably the one. What sledging did you give out, or others that you can tell us that you heard or received?
No, funnily enough, I didn't really. I mean, I had a bit of a mouth on me, but I didn't go out of my way to try and sledge guys, partly because I'm not big enough if they decide it's going to get physical, but also because I think you just look like a mug if you lose.
Yeah.
If you go and sledge someone and you lose, then they've got the last laugh. And if you win, then you've got the last laugh anyway. So there's not a lot of point in rubbing it in unless someone's been particularly nasty. So I didn't really go looking to mouth off at anyone. I remember actually laughing with Mark Andrews about the time in '96 where he was a big guy, but he'd run around and he'd be a bit of a bully on the field. And I always thought, God, you're so big and tough. Why don't you have a go at the big guys on our team rather than against me? But there was one time in '96, we were playing in Christchurch. I was very, very nervous. My first test match in front of my home crowd in Christchurch. And we managed to sneak a win against the Boks 15-11, but it was a pretty poor game. And at one point, I think I got the ball. I had no support around me and I just hoofed it. And I think it went out on the full. And as he ran past trying to charge it down and saw the ball just go out on the full, Mark Andrews just looked back at me and just bellowed out, "You're so scared." And I was like, I know. That's no secret. You're not telling me something I don't know.
So what I want to say, Mehrts, is that we all know you've got a great sense of humor. I mean, became a dad to twins at 52. You live life to the fullest. Can you show us your secret Springbok tattoo?
No, I'm scared of needles, so I've never got a tattoo.
Can the Springboks beat the All Blacks this year at the Fortress? They haven't lost the M50 test. Last time was in the 90s versus the French. Can the Springboks really beat the All Blacks this year at Eden Park?
Of course they can. Of course they can. And I think it's fantastic that they've scheduled the match at Eden Park, because it adds so much more interest, I think, when you've got this kind of a record that you're trying to defend at Eden Park. I don't know how Eden Park got this record either, because players who come from the different provinces around New Zealand, particularly the smaller provinces, have normally got a bit of a chip on their shoulder about Auckland and the riches and the population that's there, and the fact that they you traditionally think that they think they're better than everyone else. So it wasn't necessarily a ground that other players would really kind of buy into, but at the same time we've had this amazing record over the years. But definitely the Boks can beat the All Blacks at any time, and we like to think that the All Blacks can beat the Boks at any time as well. We lost 2-0 in South Africa last year. I was down there for both those, and I was so proud of the All Blacks effort. I thought there was no shame in losing to that Boks team in Joburg and Cape Town. We weren't far off being able to win, bounce the ball a couple of times, so I think there's no shame in losing to the Box. Hopefully, you feel there's no shame in ever losing to the All Blacks. But certainly, the Box can win this game, and I can't wait for it. I won't be out in New Zealand. In fact, I'm thinking of coming down and maybe doing a few events in South Africa across those 2 weekends. Where if South Africans don't go out to New Zealand, then maybe we can get some rugby lovers together and do a couple of functions to watch the games live. But I'm looking forward to the 2026 tour. The full sort of tour to South Africa by the All Blacks and vice versa in 2030. When you say about a Springbok tattoo, I'm very thankful that there aren't any photos kept of me when I was running around on the back lawn at Kaiapoi and Tuahiwi growing up, because I had this connection with South Africa. I had a replica South Africa jersey. I think I had a Bok jersey before I ever had it. I don't think I ever had an All Black replica jersey. So I had this Bok jersey. I would be running around on the backyard pretending I was Nas Borta or whatever. Obviously wasn't pretending I was like Rui Visaki or one of the big tough guys. So I was just the goal kicker. But, if photos had existed from that time, maybe people might have reconciled my performance in that 95 World Cup a little better.
I always wondered between you, Nas Botha, and Grant Fox, who made the most tackles at test time. It's a pity I'm going to be in Auckland for that test. I'm flying over. It's a pity you're not there. I would like to meet you in person. On behalf of all the Springbok fans, I would say thank you for missing that vital drop goal in the final minutes of normal time.
But
You're welcome
the one, the
times.
vital.
But the vital one right in front of the post. We thought it's all over. Andrew Mehrtens, you are an All Black legend, Christchurch, Canterbury Crusaders legend. You hurt us many times, but thank you for talking to us on SAFFA Radio. Absolute legend.
Kevin, it's a pleasure. I hope that's a pinotage. Cheers, mate. Nice to be here.
SAFFA Radio bringing home to you. SAFFA Radio bring huis thuis.